Have you had your vitamin C today? It's Vlogger Day 1058.
Good morning. I just wanted to try setting my camera on my shelf and see what that looks like when I'm on the 35. Random test. It's Sunday. It's gonna be a chill day. Gonna try and do as little work as possible because this is going to be kind of a crazy week, I have a feeling, and I'm going to be launching into a couple new things. I'm going to go down to the Peloton, grab a waffle, see my friend Lerica, have coffee. I might end up going and seeing Detective Pikachu this evening with Laura, which would be great because I actually had no desire to see Detective Pikachu until I saw the responses that were coming out, and then I was like, okay, maybe I'll give this a try. And then I thought I'd talk with you for a minute in the middle there, so we'll figure it out. But first things first, the coffee and the waffle, and then we'll go from there. How did that look? Was that good? Was that a good distance? I hope it was.
Delicious coffee as always, and good to catch up with Lerica a little bit. Today I was going to talk, because tomorrow's possibly the day in this kind of whirlwind of a week here where we might be locking down the office. We're going to meet with Richard and John in the morning, right before we go over and show John the space in person because he hasn't seen it yet, and talk about it. And obviously up front, before we meet, we have to figure out, is this what we, like, what is it that we're looking for? What do we want? What are the boundaries? Blah, blah, blah. Have that kind of a conversation just to make sure we're all on the same page before we go into it. But then, yeah, do we get it? And I thought that today I would talk a little bit about what that looks like. That I want an office not just for the short term, it's quite the whistle, not just for the short term, but long term. What are the goals? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And this ties into the evolution, the ongoing evolution of the channel, as well as just kind of where I want to go big picture. And I'm getting really excited about it. I'm talking a lot about it lately with a lot of different people. So I thought, you know what, I should dive into this a little bit on the channel, give you an idea of what's going on before we get there, because I think it's gonna make some really big changes. And why not zip around, gonna ruin someone's photo here, why not zip around and check out Notre Dame in the process, because we can. Right when you try to talk, there's always a siren. Good to see the church still standing. I don't think that will change anytime soon, hopefully. But you know, it's always nice to go and make sure. Basically, the plan is, and I'm scared. I'm not scared to share this. I'm a little nervous to share this because these are getting really close to big dreams that I have, and kind of how I think we might go about getting there. What I've shared before on the goal board and on the goal map, which I need to go back and revisit the goal map here soon, as I've talked about before, is that down the line, like, I want to get to a place where my sci-fi fantasy stuff leads towards film. It's one of the reasons that I love making videos. Making movies has been something that I've always wanted to do. It's one of the driving forces behind writing the books that I've written and pursuing publishing, is just to get those stories down, to be thinking through it, to be getting the details out, and to be working on it. And so naturally, the publishing side of things is in line with where I think we can go very easily. Like, I really enjoy writing books. I want to keep writing books, and that helps us to work through a lot of the story stuff that eventually leads to film. The film stuff feels really big. It feels kind of scary. That's where I'm a little bit more nervous to share, not because I feel like it's really huge and it's really striking out. It's really a stretch. It's really some big goals that that talk about aiming high. If you want to build your own film studio, that's aiming very, very high. But what I want to do in the short term and in the near term, and part of the reason, let's see if we can avoid the wind by going down this street. Just got to turn sometimes. It's great. Originally, the goal was to get this plan in motion by 2020, and it sounds like we might be starting a little bit sooner. But by 2020, I want to be in a position where we start off a 5-year-long period of planning. And what that looks like is, if you've been following along for a long time, you might know that with the sci-fi and fantasy stuff that I've written, it's all in the same universe and all in the same world, even if it's in different periods of time in that world. And the goal is to keep building and working on that, and ultimately have a lot of different stories. I tend to say about 50 books. If I stop and I think about all the different standalone series and trilogies that I've been working on and that I have notes on that I'm thinking about, I want all of those to come together in the end. I want all of those to work towards one massive final conclusion. So if you just read one book one trilogy, one series, you could just read that and enjoy it, and that would be the end of it. But if you read all of them, they lead you to a final conclusion, to one final climactic story. That's one of the reasons that I said that the MCU has really been demonstrative for me, not necessarily in how they did it, but that they did it, that they're able to accomplish it. The reason I say not necessarily in how they did it is because they kind of retconned their way into a lot more than I want to do. I want to actually really actively, proactively plan towards an ending and make sure that it all really works, and that the bones are there, the structure is there, that the outlines of all the stories are pretty much done, that we know who the main characters are going to be, the main conflicts, that we have a lot of the world building done around it, that everything has its place, and that we've got it all more or less figured out in advance. Not that we're going to lock it in to the point that there's no room for change or iteration or improvisation as we go, but that ultimately we really know what the thematic elements are, that we know what needs to be in place when, so that we don't write ourselves into any corners, so that when we're telling these stories, we can do it with confidence. So that if I sit down, and even if we don't make any movies, if I sit down and have like a 10-year publishing plan where I spend a whole chunk of time working on writing and developing these stories into, books and series and publishing them, that as we publish them, that I can do so with confidence, knowing that, I'm not going to accidentally write myself into a corner along the way. Sorry for the extra jiggle today. A lot of cobblestone street action here on the island. So all of that's going to require a lot of time and planning, and I really want to dedicate 5 years to just quietly, secretly planning most of it. Bring in Richard. Richard's going to be doing a lot of like the NBA side of things, like helping to work on business structure, planning, all of that. Eventually bring in an artist, concept artist who I can work with to be fleshing all this out, making a lot of in-house documentation, a lot of in-house art, just things that we can be working on to really be preparing more than anything. Some of it will be published later, some of it we may never publish, a lot of it we may never publish, I don't even know. Got something in my eye. And then, I would like to actually even bring in a musical composer, somebody who we can work with on defining the scores and like character themes and just a bunch of different stuff in advance, so that we know what we're getting ourselves into before we ever start before we ever start production on the first movie, so when we get to that. So that's kind of what that looks like, working and planning. And the way that we go about that then is we take what I'm able to do with the vlog. That's why the vlog is really important, and why I want to continue to make YouTube videos, grow the channel, keep you in the loop, is because I want to bring you along for that whole story. What does that look like to create a publishing house and a movie studio, all of that from scratch, like from the ground up, and work on that over the course of probably years, maybe decades, who knows, and include you in that process. But also then financing it, because like that, we're not going to be making any money with that for a long time. If ever. It's going to be really heavy investment on my part. And so taking the nonfiction side of my life, like Paris, the guide, Patreon, any other nonfiction projects, books that we do in the future, all of that, and taking what we can make with it and applying that to this project, like taking it and dumping it into building a studio and everything that goes with it. And that is ultimately the plan. That's kind of what I'm thinking for right now, at least. So there's a whole strategy that I'm developing. I've been thinking about this for a long time. Like, obviously there are elements of this that are new, but most of this is stuff I've been thinking about for a decade. The narrative stuff, the story stuff, the books. I've written like 8 or 9 books. I'm gonna unpublish all those books. Fairly soon, you're not gonna be able to buy any of my fiction because sorry, it's starting to rain. I'm just gonna head home now. I wanna make sure that everything actually fits into the final canon that we're creating. I wanna make sure that I'm not writing myself into any corners, that everything's properly thought out, and revisit, revise, rework the stories that I've already written so that they fit and so that they're better, so that they're worth it. And so I'm just gonna take everything off the table and revisit it here soon. Hope this is making sense. If it isn't, I'll check. I'm gonna check at home and we'll go from there. I think that all makes sense. I have some really big plans that I want to try and execute on over the course of the next decade of my life, and we can talk more about this in detail later, especially if this is something that interests you, and this is something that I think the resurgence of Write Early Wednesdays will eventually cover. But writing and my attempts to build an audience through things like Into the Nansen and my other books, so much of that I've put on hold, and I actually was planning on talking about this more specifically this week, because it just wasn't really going to work towards the end goals that I had, like a traditional structure or a path.
all the paths that I was looking at following, all of the people that I had seen do things that were kind of similar to what I wanted to do, didn't seem to be getting to where I wanted to go. And there aren't a lot of people, it feels like, that have done what I'm trying to do. I'm not saying that I'm necessarily the first to try to do what I'm going to try to do, but I did feel like there just wasn't a model out there for me to follow, really. And I've kind of stumbled into the one that I'm on now, in the sense that, not in the sense that I didn't think through ahead of time whether or not this was my strategy. YouTube is a big part of that and everything that we've been talking about today. But I feel like I've stumbled into it in the sense that, it's starting to work and things are starting to happen. And that is a new sensation, because for the most part, for the majority of my creative life, everything I've done hasn't necessarily failed, but certainly hasn't risen to the occasion, hopes, or expectations that I might have had for myself and for my projects. And so it's pretty cool to see how that's changing. We'll talk a little bit more about it as time goes on, but yeah, I don't know. I'm reminded that, I can't remember, I feel like Casey Neistat quoted somebody when he said this at one point, and I can't remember what the exact quote is, but the basic gist of it was, if you're doing it the same way everyone else is doing it, you're doing it wrong. And I think that there's a lot of risk in that, but I think there's a lot of truth in that as well, that I really want to jump into these big hopes and dreams of mine, not only because they're what I really want, and despite the fact that they're really scary, but especially because I feel like it's not something that a lot of people are out there trying to do. And again, I don't know if that's 100% true, but that's a source of my fear for sure, just in that I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm looking around and trying to piece together a model for what to follow, just trying to understand what's going on based on the success of others around me, but also like kind of excited. Like I just want to get out there and do it and try it. And even if the people that exist in the traditional realms of the creative arts that I'm a part of, or even if, whoever, if nobody really understands or gets it, that's not a reason not to do it. I want to continue to push forward, and I want to do it because I believe in it and I'm excited about it, and I cannot wait to see what comes in the future. And I hope that you will join me for it and that you'll stick around. And I mean, you stuck around to the end of this video if you made it to this part, so thank you for doing that. And I hope that you'll stick around for the adventure, and we'll just see what happens. Maybe the next 5 to 10 years will be super exciting and crazy and lead us to great things. Maybe it won't be what I'm hoping for, but I'm sure regardless that the journey will be worth it to at least some degree. I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning for yet more of Paris, and thanks for watching, and I hope that you're doing well, and I'll see you tomorrow.